works with youth at risk.
So thanks for joining us today, Mark and Becca. Why is poverty so closely linked to mental health?
Do you want to go first?
Sure.
Ladies first.
It's good to be here, guys. So one of the things that Mark and I have both seen over the years working, doing a lot of frontline work, is that there's a certain number of basic needs that you just need to have met. And when you don't have stable housing, consistent access to food, you need those. Without those, your stress level's just out of proportion, and it becomes almost impossible to regulate everything else. And so that level of stress for a long period of time, just it puts cracks sometimes in your well-being, and it needs to get addressed as quickly as possible.
Yeah, if you look at it from a really practical point of view, mental health goes across different socioeconomic levels and different groups and all of that, different age demographics. But when you look at the mental health, jumping on what Becca just said, is that there's so much to do with the practicality of poverty. And what I mean by that, I guess, more is the impracticality of poverty. So we know sleep hygiene is really important. Well, I have a hard time sleeping, and I have a nice bed in a warm house. Now imagine I'm not in a warm house. I'm trying to find 2 hours of sleep in the doorway of a bank or a bakery. Police might come at any time. Citizens might come. I might get beat up. I might get assaulted. I'm going to get judged. I'm cold, or I'm too hot. I don't have sleepwear. I'm having issues with my feet and other parts of my body that aren't being rested and relaxed. So that's just one example. But we look at all these impractical issues of poverty, how busy you are if you're poor, trying to survive. Emergency meal programs are all over a geographical location. I listened to all the places that you mentioned that we're broadcasting right now, and this issue exists across those rural and those urban communities and several others. If you have to be an 85-minute walk away for your food, or a 3-hour walk because you don't have access to public transit, well, what does that do, and is it even worth it? On top of the increased risk of violence and stability. If we look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we all remember that from high school. If you don't have your basic needs met, then how do you get to the next level? It's very hard. And then safety and security needs, you never have that if you're in abject poverty. And if you are in sort of a moderate poverty, you still have worries about that continually. Like you're just holding on. Physical health is connected to our mental health, and that is connected to poverty as well, unfortunately.
Right.
It sounds a lot like if you're not able to get those first initial needs met, it's really hard for you to thrive at any point past that. And I can imagine it would be really hard. I know a lot of the shelters that are open in any spots like that, when you go to receive services, a lot of your possessions that you have, you're not able to bring in. So each day, these people are needing to find all of those things that they've collected once again, and either going into a shelter or keeping those things that you've worked hard to collect is really difficult.
Yeah, it can be, just by the way that it's set up, it can be such a disempowering experience, because you've already lost so much of your life in terms of the story that you had, the connections that you used to have that are often broken by long-term poverty. And so to be in a position where you just have nothing but the clothes on your back that aren't even your clothes necessarily, like they could just be some you grabbed out of a bin, like you're just, it's bottom of the barrel sometimes. And so to get that climb out of that place, you really need to have all of those steps in place, a place that is safe, a place where you can sleep, people you can depend on, and even just nutrition and sleep is such a huge one.
So if we look at that piece too, like you talked about comorbidity, which is a big word to say at a certain time of the day. But when you look at that piece, you're also looking at some issues there when it comes to addiction and poverty, homelessness. There are some interactions. Now, there are people who are homeless who aren't addicted. There are people who are homeless without mental health. There are people with mental health and addiction who are quite well off. So let's not get that twisted. But when we look at comorbidity, we're looking at things like, okay, so you're addicted to a substance and you have a paraphernalia that you use with that you know is safe and you know is clean. And then you have to hand it in every night at the shelter, or you don't get it back, and sometimes it's confiscated, or you can't bring it in and you can't even lock it up. Well, I've known people even in our community who in the past, before the shelter was 24 hours and before it was fully open, when it was sort of in its soft launch, who decided not to go back because if I'm going to be cold tonight, and yeah, maybe I could die from that level of temperature and issues, but if I'm going to be dope sick tomorrow, because I can't use my drugs, and then I could die then, or I could be victimized then. So I'm stuck between a rock and a hard place. And sometimes the systems aren't really looking at that as a whole. I hear people all the time say, in our community we're lucky, and it's true, that we have an emergency meal program pretty much every meal. But again, if they're in all the corners of the city, is that really helpful to the person in the core?
Right, middle, yeah.
And on top of that, there are dynamics. I've known people who haven't gone to an emergency meal program because they owe somebody money who's going to be there, or because there's some personal dynamic and they don't want to be seen by somebody who they know is going to abuse them. They don't want to set themselves up for victimization. So there's lots there. Sometimes people make decisions that we might sit there and look at and go, is that a good decision with the time and the resources, the money you have or don't have? But from them, they're making a decision based on the moment and based on the options available to them. And if you found it from their point of view, if you looked at it from their point of view, you'd sometimes be surprised at the good decisions they're making for their own safety and protection that wouldn't appear that way to the rest of us.
Right, and I think it's just the last 5 minutes of having this conversation, there's so many factors that play into somebody that is homeless. And a lot of people just have that they just look at it and say, oh, well, that's just there. They don't think, oh, they just need to get a job.
Yeah.
Right, and that's not realistic. There's so many factors that play into this. Mark, do you want to touch on?
Sure, yeah. We don't have full employability for everybody looking for work right now, who's housed, who has an education. There's an unemployment rate no matter what.
Right.
Now, when you look at somebody who's struggling, and again, we're talking about homelessness a lot because it's a big issue in our community right now, but when we just talk about poverty, even if you're in some form of public housing or inadequate housing, but there's housing, you might be getting your meals, but you're not getting other opportunities potentially. So if you have clothes, Becca talked about the clothes in the bin, but you don't have laundry, so your clothes stink. Right. Who's hiring you? If you have issues with your teeth, and they're green and they're black and they're red and they're bleeding and they're pussing, are you going to be hired at a restaurant? Are you going to be hired at retail? Are you going to be hired in janitorial services? No, right? Because employers are going to look and say, I can't. This isn't going to work for our customers or whatever it might be. So when we talk about the bigger systems, again, I like to always bring it back to the practical or impractical portions of poverty that people don't think about unless you've been there. I've been there in many parts of my life. Lucky enough to not be there now, but beyond working in it, I bring my own experience. But it's that piece that you don't think about unless you're in it. And when you're in it, you don't have the resources all the time to advocate for all these changes that would actually be helpful because you're just trying to survive.
Right, and it's one thing for adults, but for the youth, Becca, that you work with, what are you seeing with them?
So we hear the whole, you should just get a job thing all the time, and that is so viable for people who know what it means to show up on time, who know what consistency looks like, and who know how to handle expectations. But there's a whole population of young people who haven't had those privileges, who haven't necessarily even had adults stay in their house with them, who were neglected and abandoned in so many ways and told that they do not have the capacity to perform. And so when they deeply believe that they don't have what it takes and have been almost trained in the opposite of consistency, employment doesn't work yet. There's a lot of steps that need to build up, from all the way from hygiene to safe and good communication with other people and not being threatened by it.
Right.
So sometimes if someone raises a voice at a young person who's experienced childhood abuse, they're going to respond with, how dare you speak to me this way? I'm either going to run or speak back to you.
That's fight, flight, or freeze, right?
Right.
And freeze is bad too because you're at work and now you're not functioning, you're not really productive. What happens then?
So when the stress rises and you're getting told how to respond, it doesn't work. They're not at that place yet. So taking those steps to really build up those core skills and those core traits really has to come before employability is even viable.
Yeah, there's an interesting stat on employment and mental health that we should talk about because it's related to this. And that's that the Canadian economy, the Conference Board of Canada did this study in 2017, and they found out that presenteeism and absenteeism due to mental health issues. So presenteeism is when you show up but you're not really there and productive, which can happen. If you have the flu and you're concentrating on not vomiting all day, you're not going to be as productive at work. If you have a serious mental health issue or even a moderate mental health issue and you're focused on maintaining that to the best of your ability, you're not going to be very focused on work. Absenteeism is not showing, right? Those two things cost the Canadian economy $50 billion with a B dollars a year.
Wow.
Right? So we have issues with folks who are employed making wages, and their mental health is really affecting the workplace. What's happening with folks who aren't able to be there because of their mental health issues, which are often misunderstood, right? And sometimes connected to poverty as well. And then it keeps them poor and gives them less access to opportunities and sort of mainstream opportunities.
Right, and what, like for the viewers that are watching, what are things that they can do, or what's the message that they need to understand to be able to help with what's going on in our community?
I've seen a huge rise in compassion in our community, and I get the impression that that is broader in Canada as a whole, where people are more patient when it comes to trying to understand the factors that are holding other people back. And so when it comes to mental health, sometimes it is complex and sometimes it's situational, where there's certain tasks, certain situations that are rougher on people and certain ones that are fine. And that compassion and that building up of that fight to understand is really growing, because it's not a matter of all or nothing for people with mental health problems and employment. There are ways to adapt. We can innovate. We can get creative. We can hijack this with duct tape and make it work. There are ways to do it. Right. So when it comes to employers and even just groups of employees as a whole, we can make this work if we just take a little bit more time to understand. And on a larger front, those basic needs things are all pieces of a puzzle, and they're not, one's not necessarily more important than the other. They're all valid. And so I know people who are so passionate about like rescuing puppies, and that is amazing. And someone else who is going to knit hats for babies in the NICU. One's not better than the other. All of it adds up to build security for each other and to build that stability and that sense of community. It's really powerful to just build connectedness and simple help.
It really sounds like there needs to be a solid foundation in order for people to thrive.
Well, actually, we don't really know that, right? Because there are people who have solid foundations and they still are greatly affected by mental health. There are people who are well off beyond our wildest dreams, who have more serious mental health than folks who struggle continually. But it's really tough. The one thing that I think has been really working, though, is the anti-stigma campaigns have been working. Things like this have been working. There are risks with a lot of these anti-stigma campaigns about somebody sharing too much and being kind of more vulnerable, especially if you're poor and could be taken advantage of and the rest. But I think it is working, and I see in my classrooms, I see students who casually will say, as part of conversation, oh, my psychologist told me once, right, where 10 years ago, that would not have happened in a classroom.
The shame is disintegrating.
Yeah, it's still there, but people do understand how we should be treating things like this more like physical health issues. However, there's still issues around socioeconomics and race and gender that perplex folks. So people, mental health is involved in all of those things as well, and poverty and socioeconomic status is involved in all those things. In Canada, if you're a white guy, you're going to generally make more money than a white woman. If you're a racialized guy, you're going to make less money than the white woman generally, but more money than a racialized woman. If you're an Indigenous man, you're going to make less money than the racialized woman, and if you're an Indigenous woman, you're going to make even less. And the stats have borne this out over decades. So those are factors at play. When we were talking about the homelessness issues that are affecting people here, 70 to 85% of the folks who were in the tent city were Indigenous, right? Or at least in part. And that doesn't happen by accident. That happens because of systemic issues mixed in with interpersonal. There's internal issues that we have, and we can all have them, but there's external. Here's the example I always use. And it's a bit of an interesting example, so bear with me. If I'm out drinking one night, I'm likely doing so with a bunch of friends. So let's say I'm in downtown Brantford or any of the other 14 areas we're in right now, and it's late and I can't get into any place, there's lineups, I really have to pee. well, I might go in an alley and I might urinate. And, you know, the cook comes out and the cook says, hey, what are you doing? Get out of there. And I go, oh, I'm so sorry, you know, and I'm able to communicate. I'm able to talk. I'm dressed something like this. I'm not likely going to get the cops called on me. I might offer the person some money, like, hey, here's $20. I'm so sorry. What can I do? I just really had to go. Right? It's kind of a silly example. But I probably talk my way to that. If the police come, I might even be able to talk my way out of that, right? I get a fine or a citation, a ticket, but I'm probably not getting arrested. I'm definitely not hitting the police officer. I might know him because of where I teach and what I do for a living, right? So I have options there, even in a situation like that. Now I'm a homeless person with mental health issues, and I go pee in the alleyway. The chef comes out, he says something to me, I say something back to him. It's not as nice, it's not as communicative. Right? And then on top of that, the cops are called. I have issues with the cops. I have some warrants because I missed some court appointments because I don't have an alarm clock and a calendar, and I have other issues and things I needed to deal with. Now he's threatening to arrest me. He doesn't talk to me the way I think I should be talked to. I have maybe some paranoia, other things. I get a little aggressive. Aggressive turns into a push. I'm now arrested. I now have a charge. I'm now institutionalized in some way, shape, or form. And that's a real example. That's something that happens every day all over this country, and I've seen it. And I'm not blaming the cops. I train police officers. What I'm saying is it's a lot more complex, and there are a lot less ways. Even something simple like that can turn into a bad thing for me than it could for me if I was, you know, on the system and homeless. And we have to look at that as a systemic issue. What is that? And police are doing really good work with these calls. They're getting more training. We're having these MCART and COAST programs that are doing really good work, helping with that. But police are seeing more mental health calls than they've ever seen. And there's an element of that that's also mixed in with poverty.
Right now, and so now that's a very, very, like you said, it's a systemic issue. Mm-hmm. And so is it all of those little, like those little things of individuals knitting hats for the NICU and all of those building up to turn it, like change the tide in what's going on and changing that?
We've seen that with the stigma and the anti-stigma campaigns, but I mean, you see it at Why Not all the time. We actually met at Why Not when we were younger and cooler.
It was almost 10 years ago.
I know
Maybe it was 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah, so a lot of it comes down to connectivity and dignity too. Mm-hmm. So when you start kids off right, sometimes that means equipping parents and the child at the same time. So the mom supporting moms programs and the Facebook groups even that build that sense of and break that sense of isolation, actually. And the same programs that add some extra supports and put more safe adults in that kid's life. Those things at the same time are simultaneously shifting their trajectories away from something that could have turned more ugly. And every piece of it comes together. And, you know, it is complicated, but the solution is simpler. It's that humanity and bringing that humanity and sense of dignity, that compassion back into conversations. Earlier this year in Brantford, we had an encampment that was torn up, and I was there that day. I just couldn't help but show up, even though I hadn't been that involved prior. But
Me both.
there was yeah, that's right. There was a guy who had just painstakingly built this home for himself out of skids and tarps. It was actually really impressive, far better than any fort I had ever built. And he had far fewer resources, and it was dripping because the ice was melting. It was just freezing, but he had a choice between a skid shack that he had built for himself and the dignity that he had there, and a shelter where he would have to give up all of his possessions and almost all of his autonomy. And the choice was dignity. Dignity came first. And it was a crazy thing to watch, but it mattered so much to him, and things progressed that day. But I think that bringing dignity even into frontline services more and more is so helpful, where names matter more than intake forms.
Right.
Even just
and showing up.
Yeah.
And showing up and having some consistency in that you're a trusted person. You know, when you do, I did 2 years, I think, at Why Not, and some of it was just playing foosball with kids until they're ready to connect. It's just serving hot dogs until they're ready. And we have the same issue we need to realize with people who are living with addiction and mental health, and people who won't engage in the systems because the systems have hurt them in the past. understanding why that is. So I agree totally with the connection piece and the empathy piece, but it has to have two other pieces, in my opinion. It needs to have some understanding of what the barriers do to people, and also some either personal or political will to change some of those barriers. So, you know, when you look at connection and a lack of it is affecting people all across the social spectrum, right? It's affecting people who generally have not been affected by a lack of connection, right? You're seeing 40-plus-year-old men kill themselves with more regularity than many, many other times because of a lack of connection. You're seeing drug and addiction issues bubbling up because of a lack of connection. And, you know, you bring up the Facebook groups, and sometimes it's going to be really good and really helpful, but if you can read, if you do have internet access. So think of all the ways that we don't feel connected, even if you're in a mainstream part of society. Now, think of all the barriers that might occur if you're not, right? Barriers to access to that, to feeling less connected, and how that'll exacerbate your mental health with all the practical stuff we talked about too.
Right.
I've got this one scenario where an 18-year-old guy came to me for help, and he said, I shot myself in the hand this week, and it's not looking so good. And I was like, you need to go to the hospital, buddy. And he said, no, I don't have a health card, and I hate them because they always kick me out because I get mad, and then they get afraid, and security comes. And so he's got this long history there, not to mention an identification barrier. But then, in addition, he asked me to Google the problem. He said, like, please research this for me. I don't know how tetanus works. He couldn't read. He was at a grade 1-2 reading level at 18. It was a barrier.
The barrier to employment, housing, et cetera,
Absolutely.
filling out a form, right? So,
Yeah, really, it just comes down to the people that are, whether it's the viewers, whether it's first responders, whether it's anybody, it's just taking the time to understand where people are coming from in any.
To think about it differently, to think about it practically, to use information like that you're getting here, but also talk to people, you know, talk to that guy in the corner with the sign if you can, if it's safe. In your workplaces, bring up some of these issues, or see if you can go volunteer in places like some of the meal programs, et cetera.
Right. Well, thank you both very much for being here. We really appreciate you taking the time.
No problem.
And viewers, thank you for kicking back with us. We'll be right back while Aiden interviews Front Door. Thank you.
Thanks for kicking back with us today. I'm joined with Bianca Prince from Front Door Access to Child and Youth Services. Thank you for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
So tell us a little bit about what Front Door does.
So as you mentioned, we are the access point for child and youth mental health services in Waterloo Region. So Front Door is unique in the sense that it's part of a joint initiative program between the agency Lutherwood and the agency Chrysler Family and Community Services. So it's a partnership that houses staff from both agencies under one roof to be able to provide services to children and youth in the region. And actually we are just celebrating our 20th year.
That's awesome.
In this partnership. Yeah, thanks.
So what types of youth cross paths with you guys?
So anyone really, you definitely don't have to have a diagnosed mental health to be involved with us or to seek support from us. We are there to be able to support any youth or parent in the region. Just in general, right? Life can be difficult, many challenges, many stressors, and we're there to be able to talk through that and look at helping to try and come up with a plan or point you in the best direction to get some support.
That's awesome. So you have services for youth ages 0 to 18.
Right.
What kinds of services are available?
So we have many different services. We have some intensive in-home services that we offer where a worker can actually go into the home and work with parents and children on different things that they might be struggling with or would like to improve or learn to do differently or better. We do have day treatment, which is school-based, and we have residential treatment services. So a real variety of services and supports that we offer.
That's awesome. Very good. So at the front door, what can a youth expect when they go there?
So the main access point for us is our quick access service. So we have various locations throughout Waterloo region. It is a free service, it's confidential. We definitely strive and aim to provide a safe and judgment-free space where anyone can come. And some locations are by appointment. Some locations are just strictly a walk-in, so they don't require an appointment. You're able to just come whenever you feel like you're ready, right? So you come on in and you're able to sit down and have a conversation and a session with one of our clinicians to talk about anything that you're wanting to talk about, whether that's struggles that you're having, if you're just looking for some direction or resources or supports. You have that conversation with the clinician, and they're there to, again, to talk and to listen.
Oh, now almost 1 million Canadians suffer from major depression every year, and the concept of men's health is relatively new. People didn't typically talk about it until very recently.
And one of our goals on Kickback has always been to end the stigma and open up the dialogue on men's mental health. So Joey, we appreciate you being here to share your story and specifically share about recovery.
Absolutely, I'm very grateful to have this opportunity.
Yeah, so can you tell us a little bit about your journey with recovery?
Sure. I mean, like today I'm employed as an addictions counselor, mental health coach. Everything that I've done today, I've been doing this for the last year and a bit.
Right.
Before this, it was living in addiction for 20 years. My whole viewpoint is using my personal experience. So I've had addiction for 20 years. I live with major depression, social anxiety, bulimia, and borderline personality disorder. And like you said, as men, you know, we've been brought up, you know, you don't talk about these things. Don't show emotion, like don't cry.
Right.
Right? And that's like such a barrier to be able to recover.
Yeah, and so with recovery, does that mean that you are fully recovered? Like you're through the program? What does recovery mean to you?
Like my whole platform of Personalized Recognize
Right.
is everyone recovers in their own unique way. My personal view is I couldn't say to myself I'm recovered from this. This is the destination, just like your search is for happiness, but you can't say, you know, I'm in happiness. It's the journey, right?
Right.
So I can say like I don't have desire to use today. I haven't like self-harm today, but I work on it every day.
Right.
And if I'm not working on it, if I'm recovered, then I don't have to work anymore.
And Personalized Recognize, can you share a little bit about where that came from?
That's my platform. That's basically what's saying it's Personalized Recognize. It's recovery for everyone from everything. So it doesn't matter what you're recovering from. You need to like find your own way to recover. So like a lot of people with addictions are going through 12-step programming. And if that works for you, then that's awesome. Like keep rolling with that. For a lot of people, that doesn't work for them, whether it be the God aspect or hitting to meetings or whatever the case is. So maybe there's some people that, you know, jive with cognitive behavior therapy, right? Some people would rather dialectical behavior therapy. My working professionally, I'd rather solution-focused therapy. So whatever it is that you're recovering from, find out what works for you. And then the biggest part of it is recognize. Recognize the work that you're doing. Recognize that you're not where you used to be. Because we're searching for recovery. We want to have happiness, right? If we don't have that tomorrow, we could look and say, you know, that's a failure. I'm not doing this. But we can look and say, I'm further towards it than I was yesterday. Good job.
Right.
Big thing for me is I never had anyone giving me validation, never like telling me I did a good job. So I realized that I have to do it for myself, right? If no one's going to say good job to me, I'm going to recognize myself, right? And that gives me the motivation to keep going for the next day.
I love that. And a big part of your messaging too is embracing it, right?
Right.
And you have it tattooed on your fingers. Do you want to share about what that means to you?
Sure. Well, like a lot of my tattoos I've gotten in recovery. Embrace it. I don't know, wherever. I'll just hold it like this and someone might do something.
Yeah.
So embrace it. I've always wanted knuckle tattoos. And this is, again, it doesn't matter what your trouble is, just embrace it.
Right.
Right? So I have a tumor in this finger, and I could allow that to dictate my life. I could allow that to define me. I could hide it all the time, or I can embrace this and point it out, right? Just like my addiction, just like my eating disorder and my depression. I can embrace these things rather than hiding them from everyone to see. Right?
That's amazing. I think that's such a beautiful message. And for somebody that maybe is currently going through recovery, what would your message be to them?
You're not alone, first of all, right? Everyone, like in my line of work, everyone is like, oh, you don't understand. Well, people do understand. You're not alone. There are a lot of resources. Sometimes the resources are hard to manage. Even at my work at Wayside, we have an 8-week wait period to get into our program right now. So it can be hard for people to like lose that motivation. But in the meantime, there's other resources to have. Like my whole thing, like on my online personality, it's raising that positivity. So I learned about hashtags. I never knew what hashtags were. But you can look for like depression hurts, or you can look for depression ends, right? Search that hashtag, and that's where like your motivation comes from. That's where like, you know, the next movement.
Yeah, it really comes from. And
Yeah.
I think what you mentioned about somebody saying, "Oh, you don't understand," that's where that stigma comes from, where people have been, like specifically men too, have always been told like, don't show feelings, don't show emotion, don't cry, like you said earlier. And that's where that thought of people won't understand or you don't understand comes from, because they've been brought up to think that that's not real.
Absolutely. Like my work as a professional, it's using my life experience. It's being myself, dressing the way I do, talking the way I do, showing my tattoos. It totally builds like a therapeutic alliance. It makes the relatability. So someone can say to one counselor, you know, I'm just coming off like an 8-day crack binge. And I could be like, okay, like I get you. Whereas someone who has educational but not life experience, that might create a barrier for the client or the person trying to, you know, form that relationship and form that trust so that they can talk about all their other underlying issues.
No, where was the turning point for you where you went from being someone who had all these struggles to realizing you wanted to really make an impact in others' lives?
So I've been to inpatient treatment 4 times, and after the first time for addiction, I decided I want to help someone. I was in treatment, I had the glow, everything was going great, I want to help other people. And then it wasn't until my 4th time I went back for depression that I realized that I'm not going to learn any new tools. Excuse me. I've done a lot of inpatient, outpatient, working with professionals. I'm not going to learn anything new. I know these things. It's embracing them, like doing those things that I need for myself. And once I started seeing that progression in myself, once I started being able to say good job to myself, and then share that with other people and bring their worth up. My previous job as a restaurant manager, I made a heck of a lot more money than I do now. But it's far and away how much happier I am now. People like saying, Joey, like, I can finally understand this. Like, you've provided so much help, like, I feel heard. That's better than any payday.
Definitely.
Absolutely.
Well, and just the fact that you're able to bring that lived experience into that conversation you're having, to be able to share that you do fully understand where they're coming from and that they do feel heard, that must make that whole session so much more powerful.
right? I mean, and it's for the client, the patient that I'm working with. A lot of stuff I've learned in my experience in my life is what not to do. So whether it be from like growing up or like bosses that I've had, it's always been like what not to do. I've worked with a lot of professionals in this industry that just didn't serve me, and I'm like, oh, like if it was only this way, it would work for me, and that's the way it works for me. For there's other people who see a dude with like tattoos and like wearing the clothes I do, it's not going to work for them. They need someone that's wearing a shirt and tie, right? And that's how it's individualized.
Definitely. And you mentioned earlier solutions. Was it solutions-focused therapy?
Solutions-focused therapy. It's the therapy that I prefer. In solution-focused, it's not so much about how you got here, because we know how we got here, but it's about what are we going to do now? What's the next step?
Right.
And to begin every session, it's what's better? It's a simple question. What's better today? Right? And then we can go into, recognizing growth and saying like, this is what I'm doing. Identifying goals. Maybe it's using like some motivational interviewing to try to, get whoever I'm working with to realize that help is possible, that recovery is there. I realize recovery is there, but I have to do this work. It's not going to happen for me. Like Wayside's a 90-day treatment program, and there's no way that coming in for 90 days is going to make you recovered from drugs and alcohol. It's not the case. It's the work that you're going to do afterwards, learning the skills that we're going to teach you. And then practice them in your life every single day when you don't need them, so that when you do need these skills, they're ready and they're available for you. That's solution focused.
Gotcha. Cool. Thank you for explaining that.
My pleasure.
And so when you see individuals going through recovery and they're like becoming advocates, do you see, is that like a growing trend?
It's, in my experience, like totally. Like a lot of the guys that I work with, they identify like, wow, I really want to be in this field now. I'm getting this feeling of recovery, of being well. And, the guys support each other too, right? So they say something to their peer and it's like, wow, like that's great. There's a lot of people that are who were suffering, who are now like spreading recovery. Again, with social media, like looking for positivity, there's so much out there. There's so much there. You just got to search for the positivity.
Awesome, thank you. And where, so individuals that are watching and that want to hear more of your messaging, where can they find you?
So I have the website. I'm not a computer programmer, so there's hiccups on it and whatever, but personalized-recognize.com. Instagram is probably the most of my content, so at personalized.recognize or something like that.
Right.
Facebook and those kind of social medias as well.
Awesome.
It's out there. Again, search for it. Personalized Recognize.
Yeah.
One thing I wanted to quickly touch on is you were saying your appearance and the difference between the way you dress versus someone dressed in a suit and tie. And I really feel like it's not only that, but also sometimes people's personalities just don't click. And sometimes for myself, like I might get along better with someone like you where you're kind of more down to earth, and I wouldn't want to deal with the more professional looking person, where for Ben that might work better. But sometimes also it's just like personalities are slightly different, and you have to go with what works best for you. Sometimes your first point of help isn't the one that you end up continuing through with, right?
Right, and when we're developing these skills to teach other people, we're not putting on a shirt and tie. We're not worried about like solution-focused therapy isn't my thing. There's people that developed it, and I don't know their names, but it's adapting that and presenting it in a way that is relatable, that works for me. Like this is how recovery worked for me, so this is how I present it. When I'm running like groups at Wayside or like community events, I talk casually. Sometimes I swear. Like it really helps people to feel comfortable, so that they can unburden themselves.
Definitely. Well, thank you so much for joining us. We can definitely see your passion in what you do. We're going to take a quick break, but when we return, we'll have Ryan Kitchen and Greg Horton joining us.
A great passion for science and learning was nurtured at an early age for Dr. Abigail Ortiz.
I was born in Mexico City in a very nice family. My mother is a historian. My father was a biologist. So we've been probably kind of into science for a long time. I went to school in Mexico City. I studied medicine, and then I went on to do my residency in psychiatry.
A top student, she won an award and the attention of Dalhousie University, where she was invited to do postdoctoral work in the field of mood disorder, which she found fascinating.
Well, I've always liked neuroscience, and I thought about doing a PhD right after my medical training. But then I thought that to understand human nature, like to really get into the soul of the patient, you need to know much more about the clinical features of the illnesses.
That appetite for knowledge, combined with expertise in a wide range of science applications, led Dr. Ortiz into a very intriguing field of research, one that incorporates mathematics of all things.
And my main piece of research and my main interest is in mathematical modeling. That means that we want to know particularly how mood is regulated in healthy controls, in patients, and on the relatives of those patients with bipolar disorder. Now that we understand that mathematics can help us to know that the mood differences are subtle but present, we can predict mood episodes. So we want to know that, let's say, someone with bipolar is doing fine, but they start to sleep a little bit less than their normal. They start to talk a bit faster than normal. People are noticing, and although this is not an episode per se, there is a difference. So we want to know, using mathematical tools, that they are going to have an episode and then intervene right there, instead of waiting for them to have a full-blown episode and being admitted to hospital.
A focus on prevention has won Dr. Ortiz widespread praise from colleagues and mentors in her field, as well as international awards and accolades. Such accolades have also made her very much in demand as teacher and mentor, a role she enjoys and comes by naturally.
Teaching is important for me because my parents are teachers, so I think that I have that in my genes or something. I think teaching is part of our legacy. I think teaching not only means just giving the resident or the student something to do. I think it means incorporating them to your team, to your way of thinking, or trying to make them have a different approach on a problem.
Fueled by a love of science that is matched only by her passionate care and commitment to her patients, Dr. Ortiz is clearly driven to succeed. That bodes well for those in her sphere of influence.
I think I have an inner motivation to know, to ask questions, just because I'm curious. I care about the patients a lot. I care about what we can do better, because I think there is always room for improvement. I like challenging myself. I like this feeling of being alive.
Welcome back. We've got Greg Horton back joining us here.
Hey guys.
Greg, it's so great to have you. This year now we have you as a host. Last year we had you as a guest, and same with the previous year. We are so happy to have you joining us.
Well, guys, it's gotten to a point where I'm looking forward to Blue Monday every year. But I mean, that's kind of the point of this, right? Is to destigmatize some of this and give somebody something to look forward to, rather than necessarily something to, be brought down by, right?
Definitely.
Yeah.
And I think we've had a lot of great guests on sharing some really great content, a lot of really deep stuff, a lot of stuff that can hit close to home.
100%. A lot of people, I'm so impressed with people's ability to share their personal stories here and share their personal experiences in dealing with mental illness and mental health. And this is something that really helps us kick back, right? You know, like kind of giving that, that permission that we can talk about these sensitive topics and it not be something that we have to avoid or something that we need to feel shame over, which I think has been a bit of a topic today. People feeling shame about mental illness or their mental health and how to communicate past that or through it, you know?
Yeah, and I find it's amazing to see the individuals that struggle with that, and how they, once they do get to a certain point, whether or not it's they're fully past that, or whether it's they're working through the recovery, or what, no matter what, but once they're comfortable to share, they want to share in a way that it's because to share because they don't want anybody else to go through that.
Yes.
They want to make sure that they know what they felt when they were struggling with it.
Yep.
So they don't want other people to go through that. And I just think that is so, it's incredible to see that.
You know, it's interesting. It really shows the dichotomy here of how, like, something that can be so draining and have such gravity, like mental illness, can produce something so productive and useful, like this passion and like this inspiration we're seeing from so many of the speakers today. You can really tell people are connected with the message that they're bringing across. This isn't just, you know, here's your pamphlet and, you know, see you later kind of thing. These are people that have been through the trenches, both on the side of the caregiver and the side of the person affected. You know, when I was talking earlier, we were talking about the impact this has past just that core piece, right? Just past that one person who's experiencing the mental illness, and how it affects family and friends, and how far it goes out, right up to entrepreneurs and business people engaging this, whether it be through their employees or the people that they're serving. It's really interesting. And I think it kind of represents a step forward in a lot of ways. I remember back in the early 2000s, in the early millennium, and in the 90s and stuff, that this conversation was not happening. So the fact that we're bringing something like this to light, I think, is really inspiring some people and helping us kick back a bit, right?
Yeah. And I think the biggest thing is you don't need the doctor who graduated top of his class to be the one listening to you. You don't need the newest therapy or the best therapy. You just need someone to listen to you, and that's the true reality of it. As far as like everyone here, our hosts, none of us are doctors or therapists or anything, but we have this passion, and I think that's what you need, is to share your passion and
100%.
have those open conversations.
Yeah. Just like mental illness can be somewhat contagious, you know, and when we see mental illness through our society, we can really start to get depressed too, right? On the other side of things, when we see other people succeeding and other people bringing these messages of positivity and healing, we're affected by that too. And so we can create that ripple effect, not in a negative way, but in a positive way, by having these difficult conversations. And you know what, guys, it's not even feeling that difficult anymore, at least. And here we are in front of cameras, in front of everyone in Brantford and stuff like that, talking 100% openly about this kind of stuff. This isn't your typical audience that's here. And so because of that, and getting this concentrated population of quality speakers, quality business people, all of a sudden we're creating something that's a very important message that I think that people need to pick up on, which is we can talk about this. And it doesn't have to be something that you hold in, or you have to be tough and hang in there until magically everything gets better. But something where you can effectively reach out and trust that you're going to get something back to help.
Exactly, and right now we're right around dinner time, so I know that we've had stories in the past of families watching, either whether it be year one or year two, watching in the background, and all of a sudden they're all sitting around the table, and all of a sudden Dad opens up about the fact that he's been struggling with something or has struggled with something, and then he's never talked about it before, and then all of a sudden everybody at the table has this open sense of feeling to be able to share about what they're going through. And I think it's amazing to see how you called it a ripple effect. I've described it as like a snowball.
Right.
The more people that we get involved in having that snowball, the bigger that gets, the more people that get brought into it, that stigma does go away. And Becca said it earlier, I loved it, it's disintegrating. The stigma is disintegrating. And I think that's such a perfect word for that.
I love that. That's exactly what it is. And you know, like, that, I think what that does is it generates hope. And one of the things that I've seen underlined by so many people here is that message of hope and love, and what that does to actually combat this, right? I think sometimes we kind of look down on hope. You know, you don't want to get your hopes up, right? But in fact, I think that the only reason anybody does anything is because of hope. We hope that it's going to succeed. We hope that we won't have mental illness, right? Through that hope, that's what grants us access to that snowballing effect. Other people who hope, a community of people who have that positive outlook, that desire for momentum, you know. Some people who are seeing past the inconvenience of what mental health and mental illness can be, and more about, this is someone I love. This is just something that we do, something as common as giving someone a hug when they walk through the door, a mental health check-in.
Yeah, just listening too. Like sometimes you don't need to provide an answer. And I think a lot of the times people feel that they need to provide that answer back, but a lot of the times it's just listening, just being an ear,
Yeah.
and allowing that person to get it up in their head and just allow, because oftentimes that can be something where once you get it out, once you hear yourself say it, it changes everything. Yeah. Where if you keep it up in your head, then it's something that you're kind of trapped.
Mm-hmm. I think that's, you really touched on something important there, active listening and what that's all about and how to do that. I think sometimes I think we've hit a point where people are kind of willing to hear what's going on with their friends or their family. But sometimes what happens is in our head, we've already scripted our response. We already know what we want to say to help them out. And so instead of listening, we're more waiting. And waiting for them to get through whatever they're going to say. And then I've got the perfect thing, or I've got the perfect person. When in fact, sometimes the most useful tool is to zip it and really sit and listen and wait till the person explains absolutely everything, and leaving your judgments, positive or negative, at the door until that person gives you permission. And so one of the things that I've learned that I think is a good tool for everybody to use is if someone is starting to get into that and you find yourself scripting or you find yourself pre-planning your responses, ask the person, do I have your permission to give advice, or do you need someone to listen? And then that way the person is empowered to either take your advice and have you as a partner in that, or just to use you as a sounding board so they can work through their own idea. Oftentimes, depression and anxiety can create. I loved the guy from Fog, and how he was talking about walking through the fog, right? And sometimes a person just has to walk through it to find where the clear section is, right? And in this example, it's somebody talking it through. But if we cut them off or we provide them with too much of our own ideas, while we feel like we're empowering them, we're actually empowering ourselves.
Yeah, and they're not able to get through that fog, right? It's just they've tried to open up and share, and it's another person that's not really listened to them, right? So it's another person that they haven't been able to get through to or share what they're saying, and it's so important just to provide that active listening. Yeah.
I think for active listening, people do need to know the definition and how it's different than just hearing somebody out, right? And active listening means you are engaged, you're nodding your head, you're making eye contact, you're genuinely expressing yourself through your facial expressions and your body language. You can say so much more with that to someone who's speaking. However, when we choose to verbalize over top of, or wait our turn and then wait their turn and so on and so forth, it becomes this process of you, now me, now you, instead of a constructive conversation where somebody could ask questions, whether it be to themselves or to, whomever they're talking to. And I think this is a step that I think just Joe Blow, Jane Blow out there can do today, right now. Is, maybe we were talking about how we hope that the show is going to spark conversations at home. And this is one of the ways that you can really participate in that conversation. It's by offering your active listening and offering your ear rather than necessarily your response to everything. You're right, man. We're not all doctors here. We're not all therapists. And while we might have the best intention here, sometimes we haven't thought it all the way through here, and then we're spouting it out, and we might actually be doing damage instead of offering help. Now, any outreach, I believe, is good outreach. That's a great first step. And another good second step is, being part of the conversation, just like we are right here, right? And I mean, we're all hosts. We know that some of what we're saying is scripted, right? But what I've noticed is as the day has progressed, it's gotten more and more genuine, more and more organic. And that just speaks to the bigger issue, which that if we keep talking about it, it becomes more and more comfortable, more and more normalized to talk about this kind of stuff. And so people can approach mental illness and mental health crisis with confidence rather than the gamble.
Right, definitely. And I feel so inspired by everyone that's participated today. And it's really, I love what you said about when somebody starts to open up to you and you get to that point of, you need to ask that question to yourself too. Is this person wanting me just to listen, or do they want me to provide advice? And I think you as a person could probably really or me as a person, not you specifically, but like you as a person having that conversation in your head could find out and figure out whether or not this person is actually asking for advice or if they just need that sounding board.
Absolutely. I think another thing that people could do to, do something today to help themselves out or help out somebody that they know is really lean into what is going well for you. Mm-hmm. Rarely is it absolutely everything, and sometimes the biggest challenge is finding that one thing that you can hold on and take. But I know that there's artists out there right now listening who haven't picked up their paintbrush in a while, and I know that there's gifted speakers out there who haven't put themselves in front of a crowd in a while. Mm-hmm. I know that there's writers and rock collectors and you name it, that they've put their thing away in lieu of, well, maybe just coping with their mental health, right, maybe for their job or their kids or their spouse. But, kind of in the spirit of Blue Monday and what we can do to kick back, I think that's people should pick up some of these useful tools that are just available to them right now. Maybe there's someone looking at their sketch pad right now as I'm talking. And if you are looking at your sketch pad, pick it up. But, giving these permissions to speak, giving these permissions to engage in your passion, that's where we can make the real impact, and that's where we can make the real impact today, and not waiting for the specialist to come and knock in, or not waiting for the crisis where you end up in an emergency room or something like that. Right. But instead, you've done something preventative, and you've given yourself that first foothold in order to start climbing up. I think all three of us have experienced the bottom at some point in our life, and what that's like. And sometimes, I know at least in my experience, it was somebody just reaching out their hand and saying, I don't care about any of that. I care about you, and I care about your pictures, and I care about your job, and I care about your relationships. And then all of a sudden I realized I was worthy of care. And I think that's something that a lot of people on Blue Monday should be able to dig into, is the fact that they are worthy of that care.
Thank you so much for being here with us today, Greg. But as both guest and host, we love your passion. Thank you. And we'll be right back. We're going to be joined by a couple gentlemen to delve into mental health in the LGBTQ community.
Oh, so useful.
For great seats to all the action, Rogers Super Sports Pack delivers. With NBA League Pass, get up to 40 out-of-market games every week, all season long. More dunks, more slams, more to love, live in HD. NBA League Pass, part of the Rogers Super Sports Pack. All this for only $35.95 a month. Order through your remote on Channel 431 or call 1-888-ROGERS-1 today.
When I felt lost, United Way held my back. In July 2014, I came to Canada as a refugee from the Ivory Coast with my 6-year-old daughter, who has special needs, and my 14-year-old niece. In Africa, I owned 2 grocery shops, but both were destroyed in the war. A United Way funding program taught me how to use a computer and improve my job skill. Now I am working and taking classes to get a better job. My name is Fatou, and donation to United Way Simco Mescoco help change my life. Thank you.
Do you have something to share? Let everyone know about your next meeting, your need for volunteers, or your fundraising event on the Rogers TV Community Billboard. Send us your words and we'll bring them to life on Rogers TV and rogerstv.com. When it's time to spread the word, go to rogerstv.com to add your announcement to the Community Billboard.
thanks for kicking back with us today. We know that in the LGBTQ community, there are higher risks of depression, anxiety, and suicide, as well as substance use and abuse. So we are joined by Jason Mayo, and Jason is a founding member of the Rainbow Ball, and Jason, you've experienced depression and coped with it. Can you tell us a little bit about how the Rainbow Ball came to be?
Yeah, when I was a high school student, I found that there weren't a lot of opportunities for LGBT kids to do anything. I went to high school in the 90s. I know it looks like it was probably just a decade ago, but it was one of those things where there weren't GSAs. So there were none of those services available to kids who were questioning or wondering about what to do about their sexuality. So when I became an educator and I had an opportunity at Simcoe Composite School to start something big in the school board, the kids said, what do we want to do this year as a GSA? Like, what's our goal? And I said, let's make a big dance for everyone. So any kids in the spectrum of LGBTQ can go and be themselves and just have a night of being truly like living their truths, and let us celebrate with allies, and let's make it just a big party. And we did that. And the first year we had about 65 kids, but being like, I was so fortunate to be part of that, because to watch those kids dance and to just be themselves. At regular dances, you have to worry about, like, is this kid like super drunk, or like, are we gonna have to break up fights? Or all this stuff gonna happen? At that dance, everyone, like, they created a dance circle, they were inspiring each other, they were strutting. It was just like the most perfect thing you've ever seen. And it was a wonderful opportunity, right? You had kids in drag, you had boys dancing with boys, girls dancing with girls, anyone dancing with whoever, and it didn't matter, you know? There was no judgment. And people just really got to celebrate in their own way. And we are now, this year will be our 6th Rainbow Ball, so it's 6 years strong. And it's been like a really great time. And actually there was a video that the school board released last year about a girl doing a spoken word piece about how powerful it was for her, and it allowed her to be herself for the first time, you know? And how, like, to be part of something that has that impact on kids is the exact reason why I started teaching in the first place, right?
That's very impactful.
Yeah.
I think that really what it comes down to is having that open platform and that community for anyone, regardless of their orientation or the way they identify, just as humans, really is what it comes down to, is being able to be yourself.
Yeah, I would totally agree. And it's a difficult time, right? Like, a couple guests ago was just talking about masculinity and what it means to be a man. This time of year, it's a really difficult time because we're just out of Christmas, now we're kicking into Valentine's. So in a heteronormative world where to be straight is the norm, you get into a holiday that's all about love and expressing love openly, and you see all these commercials with men and women coupled, and you start to, as a teen, see those images, and that starts to like trigger some mental issues with you, because you're like, am I normal? You know, like, why can't it be a man with a man or a woman with a woman? What does that mean? Why isn't that also advertised? And it is, of course, more so now. But even if you think of questions that we ask people, I think you and I have talked about this before. People asking you, do you have a girlfriend? When are you going to get married? When are you going to have children? Those are normal societal pushes that don't work for people who are LGBTQ, right?
Definitely.
Like, and especially if those are the messages that are broadcast by society, if you don't go with that message, if you're not going to have a girlfriend, if you're not going to have children, right here, right? You start to feel othered, right? You start to feel like you don't actually fit. And then that kind of starts to wear down on your mental health, because you just kind of always feel on the outside. Like you're always standing beside someone, but you can never be in the center, which I think is really tough for kids. I think that starts as a teenager too, right?
Definitely.
It starts as a child. Like even when you start to simulate play, right? Like when you're having a fake wedding or when you're like playing house. It's a man and a woman, right? Even when we gender toys, when we do all those things, you'll be out at like Walmart and you'll hear a parent say, "Oh no, honey, put that back. That's a girl's toy." You know? And it's just like, it's a toy, right? It's a piece of plastic. It should have no virtues or values placed upon it. But we do that, right? Pink and blue with colors, all those things. So like, there's all these pressures, and especially at a high school, it's huge, right? Like you have a ton of pressures. These kids are already like bubbling cauldrons of hormones. Like they're already going through so much that to add on sexuality to that, and even now, even more so, to add on gender to that, right? To add those two pieces, it becomes such a burden for that child. And they're trying to figure out who they are, but for some people, and for straight kids, I would say, and this may sound bad, but it's pretty easy because you automatically fit in the mold, right? You don't have to tell somebody, "Hey, I'm straight." There's no straight coming out party. Do you know what I mean? And no one's going to ask you. They're not going to walk up to you and say, "Hey, Ben, do you like girls?" They're not going to say that. But they will come up to you and ask you the opposite question. Really? Do you know? And like, that's a lot for a teenager to deal with, you know?
Definitely.
Yeah.
So, and like even for myself, like in high school, I was the only out gay kid in my high school. And it wasn't even by choice, right? I told somebody, they thought it was interesting gossip. And by the time a weekend had passed, I was out. And so like, then you have to try to kind of struggle to swim and keep your head above water, right? And it was a tough time, like honestly.
Absolutely.
And I had I have clinical depression. So to add that piece on top of that, it was like constantly trying to keep myself alive, right?
That would be very, very difficult.
Yeah.
What are some ways that our viewers can better support their youth?
I think one of the ways is to just have those dialogues and have those conversations. I think avoiding talking about it is the worst thing that you could do. You definitely have to ask those questions. It's like suicide prevention, right? If you know someone is suicidal, you ask them. And that's like some of the best things that they can tell you for training. So if you have questions or if you do wonder, like don't be afraid to ask, "Hey, are you interested in this? What can I do to help you with that?" Right? Oftentimes parents are uncomfortable with it because they don't want the struggles for their child that come along with it. So the idea of their child being LGBT in our society, they don't want them to struggle. They don't want it to be tough for them. Because to be honest with you, if it was a choice, most of us would never choose that because we know how hard of a life that is, right?
Definitely. Well, I think when you look at parenting, parents want what is best and almost easiest for their children, and it's not, happiness almost comes second in that sense because they just want their kid to kind of make it through school, graduate, and a lot of times if children don't feel welcome or included at school, then you see things like absenteeism in school and you're all of a sudden you don't show up to class a few times. It's really hard to get your head above and succeed, especially high school. It's only 4 years.
Yeah, and a lot of those times too, if kids are struggling with those issues, they are going to skip class because even in that room, they don't feel like themselves. So as educators, one big thing that we can do, and some of the schools are really proactive on this, is providing materials that reflect our modern society. So not just reading the same books that we've been reading for the last 50, 60 years, but having characters in the books who are racially diverse, who are sexually diverse, right? So that when I read a book, I can be like, oh, this guy's just like me. Like, oh my God. And so I don't feel alone anymore. And I know it's a fictional character and it's just a small piece, but just being able to have that component where you understand that you are not alone is amazing, especially at this time of year, right? Like people get so down that if you even just have one inkling of, yeah, I am normal, it's okay. There are other people like me and I can make it, you know, is a big deal as well.
Right. And what are the conversations that parents should be having with their children, or what is that for, like, if as a parent somebody they may not know how to broach that subject?
I think that's a difficult subject. I think the child himself gauges how you're going to react based on what they've seen about your behavior, about sexuality throughout their life. So if it seems like they're in even a slightly homophobic atmosphere, they're going to be super hesitant to talk about it, right? Even with my own parents, I grew up in the country on a farm, right? Like on a pig farm. I was out at high school at the age of 15, but I wasn't out to my parents until about the age of 23 because I didn't want them to lose credibility in our community. Like, they were well-known farmers. I didn't want their friends to stop talking to them just because I was gay, you know? And like hearing the conversations that they were having and that their friends were having and the slurs and all these things, and it becomes difficult. And so you hold on to that because you want to protect them. It's not about protecting yourself half the time, it's about protecting everyone around you. And so I think it's for parents, and especially just for people in the community, is to stop using words incorrectly. Right? Like, don't say things are gay because they're not fabulous and, you know, exceptional like me. They're like, do you know what I mean? That's not what they mean. They mean it's lame or it's stupid or it's dumb. And like I always tell kids when they use it in class, I am none of those things, right? Like, so if you're going to use the word, use it properly, you know? And just like understanding that language is impactful, and that when you do say those things around people, it does affect them. And you never know who around you is gay. It's not like we wear a badge.
Right.
So when you say those things, you could be offending your best friend, and you could never know. And that person may be more hesitant than ever to tell you and to be themselves around you because they think that you're homophobic or that you won't be able to deal with it, you know?
Right. What does it mean to be able to share your message and share your story for individuals that may not be out?
I think for me, it's super important because I always want kids to have that opportunity to just live their truth. I've never been ashamed of who I am. I am gay. That's such a small part of me. There's so much more that I am. And I think kids need to understand that too, is like, you are so many things. This is one piece. Wear that piece, but understand that it's like the shirt that completes your outfit. Do you know what I mean? And it doesn't have to define you as a whole person, but you should be proud of that, and to really just understand that that's not something for everyone else to be proud of. That's something for you to be proud of, you know, and for you to hold on to, and for you to live with, and for you to really just go on and not be apologetic about it, right? Like, I'm unapologetically gay. I'm not going to say I'm sorry for who I am. I'm just going to live my life and hope that you can be part of that.
Right.
Yeah. And I think that's what kids really need to strive towards.
Awesome. So what does your self-care look like?
Well, for myself, I have a crazy life. So like, I'm doing all kinds of things. Teaching during the day, which is really great, like being able to be around kids and help and do all that kind of stuff. That's really good for my depression. So like, it helps me kind of feel purposeful. And then honestly, I do a ton of stuff in the community. So musical theater, I'm on a stage, singing and dancing, having all kinds of fun, doing cooking events at breweries, which is crazy. And then really just hanging out with people. And the one thing that I do every day to make sure that I have time to relax and reflect is I have a bath and a beer every day. And I usually post what beer I'm drinking. But yeah, and it just forces me to kind of stop and relax and just reflect on what's happening in the day.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate your messaging and encouraging the LGBTQ community as a whole. And thank you for your messaging of acceptance. We're very happy to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
Coming up, we have Shaquan Blake, who's going to be sharing with us, and he'll be joining us right after this break.
Day and night, first responders are on the front line of traumatic events, caring and protecting each of us.
Due to the nature of our job, we have a more focus on trauma. We tend to see trauma on a fairly regular basis. They say, you never really know what you're getting into, and you really don't. So you have all your day-to-day things, just being a regular person, then you have the job on top of it. So it can add up to be a lot.
There is an unimaginable mental toll these experiences inflict on a person. The Ottawa Paramedic Peer Support Team created a program to help.
It has been difficult in the past for paramedics to come forward because of stigma. There was the suck it up attitude.
Enter the creation of the Ottawa Paramedic Peer Support Team.
So one of the things that we've educated our staff on here is that we can't read your minds. If you're having a bad day, sometimes people can be happy and smiling. We have no idea they're having a rough time. So we've asked people to reach out. You know, put up your hand, say, I need help. You talk to a peer supporter. Sometimes it's more obvious. If you see someone crying in a hallway, you're going to approach them and say, you know, can I help?
This voluntary team allows first responders 24/7 access to one-on-one support and crisis intervention resources.
We have a group of about 50 people on our team. So it's comprised of frontline people, so paramedics, our comm officers, our logistics staff, we have admin staff, and these people work on a daily basis to kind of help people work through their problems or challenges that they may be having, either workplace or personal. And then when bad things happen in our workplace, which being a paramedic, we do attend a lot of critical events, then we have a process in place that we can help people kind of work through things, see what they need, and see how we can help them get resources.
The team is readily available to help stabilize, normalize, and refer to an appropriate higher level of care if required.
Our goal is to take someone who's maybe having a bad day for a variety of different reasons. It could be workplace, it could be personal, it could be a combination. See what we can do to help, if there's something within our scope that we can do to help.
The Ottawa Paramedic Peer Support Team is committed to the responsibility of protecting the mental health of one another, mental health education, and decreasing stigma.
People don't realize that we're real people. We don't wear capes. We're just human beings. At the end of the day, we're going home to our families, we're going home to our friends. Not everyone goes home healthy. We're hoping that by having our peer support program, people go home healthier, at least are able to go home in a better state.
Welcome back to Kickback. We're very excited to have you join us. My name is Ben.
I'm Aiden.
And we are joined by Shaquan Blake. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, guys.
We really appreciate it. Shaquan, you're a member of the LGBTQ community. Mm-hmm. Can you tell us a little bit about your journey with that?
Well, like, my coming out story is a little strange. I actually didn't come out to my dad myself. My brother kind of came out for me because like I had like something to tell my dad, and then my brother was just like, oh, I know what you want to tell him, and then he kind of just blurted it out, and my dad was like, what? And I was like, there, that's not what I wanted to tell you, but here we are. So, and he took it pretty well. Like he made jokes about it, and he was like, oh, so like, are you gonna have a boyfriend one week and then a girlfriend the next week? And I'm like, haha, very funny. Yeah. And he was just like, well, you're my son, and you came from me, my body, so I have no choice but to love you. Mm-hmm. And yeah.
And that's an incredible response that he had. And it must have been like to have your brother blurt that out and have that. I don't know if that was something that maybe made it simpler. Potentially,
I guess in a way. In the moment, I want to kill him. Yeah. But the way my dad responded to it and seeing how he reacted, I don't think it could have gone any better. I'm kind of grateful that he did it.
Right. That's amazing that he had that response, and I'm sure he's watching.
Yeah, he said he would be, so we'll see.
Awesome. What could maybe viewers or parents that are at home can take away to help better support their youth?
Just keep an open mind and like remember that it's not a choice. Mm-hmm. Your child is born the way they are. Just like there's things that the parents, like Trace's parents, have with them that they don't necessarily like or other people don't like, and what they say to like, well, I was born this way, this is just who I am. So I feel like that mentality should be put towards your kids as well. Like if that's the way you are, your kids are this way, you should love them regardless. No.
Right, and I love the messaging of it's love always, right? It's just important to always, unconditional love, exactly. Yeah. So what are some steps maybe for the youth that are at home that maybe haven't come out? Do you have a message for them?
you're not alone.
Yeah.
That's for sure. There are hundreds of thousands of kids who are just like you, just as scared as you are. I would recommend kids that aren't ready to come out to kind of try to find others that they can kind of talk with and relate to, so they can, you know, build up that courage to when it actually is time to come out, that they've had that interaction with somebody and talking about it, that it will be easier for them to come out to friends and family when the time comes.
Right.
Yeah.
For them to really to speak out, right, and to share.
Yeah, exactly.
Nice. And what does it mean to you to be able to share your being a part of the community and sharing and helping others maybe come out as well?
I would, for me, like, a support system is really important. And I've had friends who had trouble coming out to their parents, and what I did for them was I did this thing where I would pretend to be the parent and like do different scenarios and role playing, and just see even testing out different outcomes to see how they would react to certain outcomes. And it worked, because 2 out of the 5 friends I did that with, they like came out to their parents like maybe like a week after, and
I
they
think
said
that's
everything went well.
really important, kind of coping ahead and seeing. And for myself, like I'm straight, so for me, I can't even like put myself in those shoes. Like it, obviously for someone coming out, it would be a lot more difficult, but I think that like that's a great coping mechanism to kind of cope ahead and judge the outcomes and know how to react, because I can imagine that's like you've lived all your life up until that point, and something's made you hold off until that point to come out, and obviously that's such a big part of who you are, so
Yeah.
that's something you want to share with the people closest to you.
100%. Yeah.
And once you had come out, how did you feel? Like once you had told your dad, or your brother had told your dad?
I honestly, the number one person's opinion that mattered was my dad's opinion. And then once I was able to do that and see his reaction and know that everything was fine, it felt like the world was lifted off my shoulders. And then after that, I didn't care what anybody thought of me. I'm like, I have the acceptance of my father, and that's all that really matters to me.
Right, and that's amazing. And now you mentioned that you had that coping strategy with your friends, like helping them role play through it. And now not always is it where the friends or the parents, family has a positive response to that. What would you say to somebody that maybe receives a negative response from a loved one?
Again, that you're not alone, and if just because that one person, even if it maybe someone who like their opinion matters the most to you, even if they don't necessarily accept you, like they're not the only person that is in your life. I'm sure the person has many other people who accept them for who they were. Who you choose to love shouldn't affect the way someone looks at you. If they loved you before, why does that one thing change the way they feel about you all of a sudden, you know?
Right.
Yeah.
And what are you seeing as far as inclusiveness, or what steps can viewers take to be more inclusive?
Do you want to elaborate a little bit more on that?
So like just to feel more inclusive with like friends or family with the LGBTQ community, and being maybe they're interacting with somebody from that community and they just want, like, I mean, it would be to just treat them normal. Right? Like just like everybody else, like there's no difference in how you treat it, but just inclusiveness in general.
I would say for anybody that is part of the LGBT community and that is struggling with accepting themselves or wanting the acceptance of others, that you are who you are, and if you hide that part of you from the world, you're not only, like, I don't want to say lying to others, but you are lying to others, but you're also lying to yourself. And I feel like the number one thing when it comes down to who you are is being true to who you are. So I would really hope that they would take that and just roll with it.
Right, and that plays into finding friends or family that you can confide in and trust, right, with, until you really are ready to to come out to everyone.
A support system is the number one thing that you need when you are an LGBT member and you are struggling with those obstacles. Like, would you have a good support system? And it doesn't have to be a whole bunch of people. It could be one person, and that one person can make all the difference.
Right, and so somebody maybe that hasn't found that support system, that's at home watching right now, do you have any tips or strategies for them to be able to take that step or to reach out to that support system?
What I found is that throughout the years, the LGBT community has been more and more accepted by the world, and there are so many different programs now for LGBT members who feel like they're alone. There is there's groups that people gather, just like AA, but like for LGBT, and then everyone just gathers together and they sit down in a circle. They talk about their lives and they talk about what they've gone through in their lives. Being an LGBT member, and I feel like that right there is a perfect outlet, because you don't feel like you're going to be judged right there and then. You're just in a safe area, knowing that everyone who's sitting around you has a similar story, if not the same story as you do.
Right.
And I feel like that alone takes a weight off your shoulders, and that gives people room to open up more.
Right.
One thing I think really unique about kind of the whole LGBTQ community is that it is a community, and as far as like heterosexual, you don't have that community as a support system where it's really unique that you guys are able to kind of support one another. And imagine that there's some like kind of subcategories of the community that aren't as supportive to one another, but maybe you can speak to that a little bit, kind of supporting each other, what that looks like.
I would say, like, in Toronto, there's a lot of drag community going on, and what I tend to see is that a lot of people go out to drag shows to support the local drags, and that's a perfect example of a support system that you don't expect, and it's just like it just floods through the doors, and I feel like that's amazing. And then like there's different events that happen at different places in Toronto, like Glad Day bookstore. That's the largest gay bookstore in Toronto. I think it's, I don't know if it's in the world or in Toronto. But
wow.
Thank you so much, Kwan. We really appreciate you coming here and sharing your story and your message. We'll be right back after this break.
Thanks.
I remember as a kid, being shy and being a bit insecure about myself. I've always felt like I was different and like there was something wrong with me. I'd say around grade school that I noticed that something was off. I've always been an anxious kid and worrying. I remember staying up at night and just worrying about school, about my family. I also had like contamination, so for me it was fear of germs, and so I would wash my hands hundreds and hundreds of times per day. So I would make up things just so that they wouldn't know that I had OCD.
At the age of 14, Gabrielle was diagnosed with obsessive-compulsive disorder. Left homebound and often bedbound, she began feeling helpless and became suicidal.
So when I was at my darkest time, I felt so alone and so like nobody understood and very isolated. And it felt like I was living in a nightmare and no one could see. It was just darkness. There was no hope. There wasn't even life anymore. I just felt stuck, like there was nowhere to go.
As Gabrielle began to recover, she also began to feel less alone.
So the first person that I talked to actually was my sister, and it was the first time that I talked openly about my thoughts, and that was really a turning point.
Ultimately, exposure and response prevention, or ERP treatment, began working for her.
This therapy is really exposing yourself to the fear, so exposing yourself to the thoughts and staying with that anxiety.
Soon, Gabrielle began to feel life turning around.
A year after being discharged from the hospital, that I started to see that I was going back to school, that my grades were more stable, and that I was reaching out to friends and doing more things. And also that's when I started wanting to do advocacy for mental health. I decided to start a young adult support group for people of my age group to share their stories and share what is going on, their struggles.
Today, Gabrielle continues to speak publicly. Her openness and honesty has encouraged many youth to open up, feel understood, and no longer feel alone.
I've been able to turn this pain and struggling that I've gone through and letting people know that it's okay to struggle with this, with whatever they're dealing with, and that they're not alone.
Welcome back to Kickback. So excited to have you joining us today. And today we're joined by Lauren Wallace, Psychotherapy, and you are also a part of a new campaign from the Canadian Counselling and Psychotherapy Association called Talking Can Help. So thank you so much for being here with us, Lauren. Can you share a little bit about the Talking Can Help campaign?
Yeah, sure thing. So this is a campaign from the Canadian Counselling and Psychotherapy Association. So it's my national association that I'm a part of. They bring together counselors and psychotherapists from across the country and provide opportunities for us to network, do research, and just generally help Canadians to the best of our ability.
Amazing.
So the campaign happened in November, and it was a social media campaign. It took place over a week. And there were 3 videos, one on anxiety, one on depression, and another on addictions. And so these videos were supposed to be out to the public to help them see where they can get resources, the fact that they can see more than one different kind of mental health professional, you know, social workers, psychologists, psychotherapists. There's a lot of people out there. So really just helping people who otherwise might not have seen that opportunity was there.
Right, yeah, exactly. And there's so many different tools. I think I've heard it described as having different tools, like for your tool belt in dealing with whatever it might be, whether it be depression, anxiety, or any factor of mental illness. But just you have all of these different pieces, and a therapist or a social worker are just like another tool to be able to speak to and talk to and to help work through recovery. And that's fantastic. And so is the overall goal, it's all about just how encouraging people to talk to someone, right?
Exactly, yeah, talking can help. So the idea that like really finding someone that fits for you, and exactly as you were saying, like every person is different. So there's multiple avenues to get there, different tools. And yeah, just really helping people to see, you know, like 1 in 5 Canadians has a mental health issue. So whether you're directly affected or your family and friends of that person, I think we're all affected. So helping family and friends get help, is really the main goal.
Yeah, exactly. And so also, like another tool in the belt could be like exercise or yoga, and that really ties into the mind-body connection that I know you really wanted to discuss, and we're excited to have you here to share about that. Can you speak to the mind-body connection?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. So actually my first career was as a physiotherapist. So I had decided, you know, way back in high school that I wanted to be a physio. And by the time I got there, I was working with a lot of patients in my clinic who had chronic pain. And just finding that a lot of them were coming in, you know, week after week, and their pain was going up and down. And, you know, one week they would say, I have no idea why I have such awful pain right now. You know, I'm coming consistently, I'm doing my exercises, what's going on? And then I would find out that they're in the middle of divorce, or they've just lost their job, or they've lost someone close to them. So really these emotional stressors was just making their pain go through the roof. And I was really amazed by how responsive they were to hearing that the pain was actually linked to their emotional stress. So that happens in a number of ways. One of them is that you have increased cortisol when you are emotionally stressed. That impacts inflammation, and inflammation impacts the pain. So physically there's more pain happening. But also the pain signals that are being sent to the brain are being received in a completely different way. So the brain actually picks up that there's stronger pain happening. So it's a number of things happening in that connection, but it's really fascinating. And so when I realized how engaged I was in helping these patients with chronic pain, I decided to go back to school and become a psychotherapist. And now this emotional world of my clients is completely within my scope, and it's really exciting because there's so much there. And I still work sort of on a physical level as well, so helping clients tap into what they're feeling during the session when they're talking about different parts of their lives and what we're working on,
Right.
but also sending them home with doing mindfulness and meditation. Meditation is huge to get them connected to their body again.
Right. Well, it sounds like it was a very natural progression for you to go from physiotherapist to psychotherapist.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, some people think it's that's quite a career switch, totally different. But yeah, actually, you're right. There's not a huge difference there because we store a lot of those emotional stressors in our body if we're not able to express it or work through it.
Right.
Yeah.
Did you find that there was a lot of people that were seeking help for their physical health, and then they were unaware that it was mental health related, and kind of that they recognized this physical pain, but they didn't realize that it was coming from their, like, whatever was going on mentally?
Yeah, definitely. There was a lot of patients I had as a physio that would come in and they would get sent from specialist to specialist, and no one could figure out what was happening, and they would come to us, a lot of them in tears, trying to figure out what was happening, and we would explain that connection and then also make a referral to see a mental health professional, because that was so key. But also I know for myself that when my stress levels are at the highest, I have acid reflux, and that's pretty interesting too, because sometimes the first thing I pick up on is the acid reflux, not the stress level.
I can totally relate to that.
Yeah?
I experienced that myself, so I totally get it.
Yeah, sometimes those those pains or those physical signals are easier to pick up on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and can you explain? I mean, meditation for some people, I feel like they might be a little standoffish or not understand, or not not understand how that works. Can you describe how you utilize meditation in your practice?
Yeah, definitely. So sometimes I actually do the meditation with the clients in practice. So I'll actually sit with them, and oftentimes this gets them in the room. If they're incredibly overwhelmed in that point in their life, then sometimes it's hard for them to just sit there and be with me. They get carried away. So it brings them into the room. But also when I send them home to do that meditation on their own, there's a number of things involved. So it depends on the goal with the client. But sometimes it's a matter of increasing focus for people who have attentional difficulties, and that can help them with relationships, being at school, being at work, helping that focus piece. Other times it's being more connected to their body if they have those painful things that are happening in their body, and trying to figure out where that's coming from and what emotionally it's being connected to. Right. But yeah, so it depends on the client and which form of meditation would be most helpful.
Right.
Now you mentioned goals, and I know that in therapy it's very important to set goals, but I think a lot of times, unless you're kind of seeking out therapy or you're already actively in therapy, a lot of times people don't really set goals for themselves. So what would you recommend for viewers at home, kind of as more of like ahead of time, coping ahead to set goals?
So setting goals around meditation?
Around meditation, or just overall setting goals, the importance of it.
Yeah, goal setting is absolutely huge. And I do a lot of work with clients around that. So I guess the first thing would be to identify where the greatest stress levels are. So prioritizing what is the most painful or what the person is struggling with the most, identifying how they can impact that. So if it's an external thing, sometimes things are outside of our control, so the only thing we can respond to is our reaction to it. So looking at prioritizing, what's the most painful or stressful, and then working from there. And in terms of the meditation piece, I think starting off with guided meditation is really helpful. So for anyone who hasn't done meditation before, it can be very challenging to sit and do silent meditation. And so even sitting for 1 minute at a time for beginners is a good start, but also the guided. And I use Insight Timer. That's what I use with my clients. Yeah. Yeah, it's a great app.
Awesome.
And earlier you mentioned with the campaign, the idea of having, like speaking to a social worker or a psychotherapist, for somebody maybe that hasn't taken that step to seek that level of help. Do they have to work with the first person that they come across, or like what's the process of finding the right person for them? I know Aiden had mentioned that personality definitely plays a part in that. Can you speak to somebody finding and seeking help?
Yeah, that's really important because it's an overwhelming time already if they think that they might need to talk to somebody. So yeah, the way to it is really important. So the Talking Can Help campaign, the website is talkingcanhelp.ca, and so they can start there. The videos are online, and there's a lot of resources and access to a list of psychotherapists and counselors across the country. So that's a great start. Making sure that the therapist is qualified is a really good one. Checking what school they went to, their qualifications, that sort of thing. And other than that, looking at maybe the theories that they use is important too, and seeing if they mesh well with who you are or not. And then you can always check in with them and say, I'm new to therapy. I would like to maybe just try this out. And some therapists offer free consultations just so that you can ask questions and get a feel for their style of practice. But know that if it doesn't feel like a good fit, you don't have to stick with that one therapist. They also want you to feel like you have a good fit, and so making sure that you're shopping around and finding one that is suitable for you is really important.
Definitely, that therapeutic relationship is really important in order for a client to succeed.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's actually more important than the modalities that they're using. Research has shown,
And if somebody goes in and speaks to somebody, can you speak to the importance of if that person doesn't work, that's not a bad example of how everybody is. Like, keep trying, right?
Yes. Yeah, exactly. I know people who have had bad experiences, and it's really unfortunate, even a family member who had a bad experience with a mental health professional, and sometimes it can turn them off of the profession entirely, which is too bad because it's a really important method to getting help. But sorry, did I answer your question?
Yeah, no, that was perfect.
The whole thing.
Yeah, because I just know that it's you don't want to stop there. If you have a bad experience, it's important to keep trying, whether it was talking to Jason and Shaquan, if you were to come out and share that with somebody and they were to not to have a negative response to that, you shouldn't at that point say, you know what, that's okay, I'm going to keep this to myself now. It should be something that you continue to pursue until you can be yourself. And that it would be the exact same with dealing with depression and sharing that with somebody.
Yeah, and finding someone that you're comfortable with so that you can then share and work through those bad experiences, because that can be traumatizing. Having a professional who doesn't make you feel safe or comfortable with what you're sharing.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. After the break, we'll be back with Nikki Straza from the Freedom House.
By day, Chris was a proud elementary school teacher. Yet by night, he would alienate himself to survive. While in university, Chris knew something wasn't right.
So in university, it was, there was a lot of times where I was, on top of the world, up all hours, talking a mile a minute and doing things that were very irrational and outrageous. And then other times I'd lock the dorm room and I'd lie in my bedroom and people would knock and I would not answer their door. So it was complete extremes. These waves got very big to the point where there were lunch hours where I would actually hide in the bathroom, in the staff washroom on the floor, lying there going, what's going on? I can't believe why I'm feeling this.
No longer was Chris able to hide behind his mask. In 2001, Chris was diagnosed with bipolar disorder.
It's something that's so hard to explain because it was so full of elation and juvenation, and it took over every part of my body. It's a feeling beyond what you could ever imagine. What goes up must come down. A bit of depression here to crash completely out. And in mid-July, I was in my parents' basement for over 2.5 months in the dark. Worst depression you could ever have. I almost lost my life several times.
Eventually, treatment started to take effect. At the encouragement of his father, Chris began writing about his mental health challenges.
In 2005, my father and I sat and started to brainstorm a possible book that I could write about my life. I had been through so much and I knew that I could make a difference if I could share my story. It kick-started something within me.
Chris had found his voice and dedicated himself to raising public awareness about mental health and inspiring hope, resilience, and healing.
Any of my stories that I've written have always been about hope. Showing people that you may struggle today, but you gotta believe that the next day is gonna be a better one. If you don't have that hope, it's hard to move forward. And when I was in the basement struggling and suffering, you know, my candle was down to like just a little ember. Now it's a full flame.
Since 2014, Chris has regularly participated in the Royals Is It Just Me mental health education program for youth.
The youth are so important to reach because that's our future. So if you can reach a heart at a young age, what you're doing is you're steering them in the right direction.
Chris's goal is to take his message of hope worldwide.
We're in this together. It's a together. We can do it alone, but together we can do incredible things.
All right, we've got Nikki Straza here joining us. Nikki's from the Freedom House, and she's here to talk to us about the power of kindness as well as Superhero in Me. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's a great honor.
So Nikki, tell us a little bit about the kindness initiatives that the Freedom House has done.
So Freedom House really just believes that kindness can change a city, and kindness changes people. Mm-hmm. And so we just really believe that if we can be a catalyst for more kindness in the city, that what happens is people encounter kindness. Kindness transforms their heart and lets them have a little ray of hope. And hopefully that spurs on some growth, and they pay it forward, and kindness keeps spreading. And we've seen it happen time and again with all the different types of events that we've done in the city, and from car washes where we give $1 instead of charge $1, to just giving out, free water bottles, or whatever. Like, there's lots of different ways to be kind, and it's just a great opportunity to let people know that there's still good in the world, and that kindness matters, and that kindness is easy.
Absolutely. I think as the world kind of gets busier and stress levels get higher, it's so easy sometimes to have that anger, and it's easier to kind of, if you know a little bit about like the way your brain works, as you get angry, your brain actually shuts down, so it's only your brainstem that's functioning, and that's why things become very linear. So I think when you're angry and stressed out, it's easy to just kind of stomp off rather than taking that second to be kind and be patient. So the work you guys are doing is phenomenal, and we're really grateful to have you here. Now you also do Superhero in Me.
Yes.
And we're really excited to hear a little bit about that. Can you tell us about that?
Thank you. So Superhero in Me is a kindness curriculum that I've written, and it's 8 workshops that we do in the school classroom that creates and explores what it actually looks like to have a kind classroom. And it's a proactive anti-bullying strategy. So a lot of anti-bullying strategies kind of deal with bullying after the fact. That's the bully, this is the bullied, we stand with the bullied. And there often is no path for redemption for the bully. Mm-hmm. And it becomes sometimes a little bit more perpetuating instead of resoluting. Mm-hmm. And so I tried to look at it a different way, and I thought, what would happen if the culture of the classroom was such that even when someone messed up, there was a path forward? Mm-hmm. And that kindness was the way to resolve issues in the classroom, even when we make mistakes, and we all do. We have a bad day. We, have that anger, and we're working with that brainstem. That's happening for all of us. And the amazing power of kindness is, even when we're in that state, kindness, when it's given to us, in that moment arrests something, and it stops us in our tracks and makes us go, wait a minute. And it's really a powerful tool. And the amazing thing about kindness is that it benefits the giver and the receiver. So there's, kind of multiple benefit happening. And I always joke about kindness math. If kindness was a sheet of paper and I cut off a corner and I said, I'm going to give, I have 4 points of kindness and I'm going to give 1 to you. When I cut that corner off, all of a sudden you have 3 points of kindness and I have 5. And that's kind of the math that kindness is it keeps growing. And we've just seen so many times in these workshops how powerful kindness is. And we really want to encourage kids and take them through an experience of what it feels like to receive kindness, what it feels like to give kindness. And then because it's that natural helper high, the chemicals in our physiology are already going, man, we want more of that feeling. It begins to perpetuate already within their own chemical system and bringing really positive things to it. And it's incredibly rewarding.
It's got to be, if I'm interested to hear, you mentioned the car wash earlier and how you gave $1. How did people respond to that when you did it?
It's actually really fascinating. We have such a variety of responses, right down to people who can't handle it and throw money at us and run. It's really quite fascinating. And we're a little bit strict. Like, we don't want your money. We're here for the honor of serving you. We're here to make your day better. And a lot of people just don't even know what to do with that information. And depending where they're at, and some people who just can't grapple getting something for free just really have a hard time with it. But it's never a bad moment. They just no, then donate it or whatever, and they're throwing donations, and it's usually like $5 or something they're throwing. It's like, we only asked for $1, and then we so it's quite hilarious, but it's a testimony to the power of kindness, because it breaks down so many of those barriers and allows us to have conversations about things that actually matter. And usually what happens is people will say, well, why would you do something like this? Right. Like, en masse, with a roll of toonies or a roll of loonies, wash a whole bunch of cars on a Saturday morning. And it's one of those things that when people walk away from a moment like that, knowing that as a human being they're important, that's a mark that stays with them for a long time. And hopefully, when they're having a dark moment, they remember.
Yeah, and I'd be interested to know, and now this is a ways in the future, but how the students that you're working with and how you're teaching them kindness, how they would respond to something like that down the road when they go through that car wash and somebody hands them $1, and just see what their response is.
I know, and it's been interesting because I've actually done Superhero and Me at Braemar for a number of years now, and so I do another program there called Kid Lead, which is a leadership program. And so the kids that have gone through my program in grade 3 and grade 4, I see them again in grade 6. And it's really, really fascinating to watch what sticks and to watch them remember. And one of the parts of the program is what we call Marble Day. And so we have this analogy that we kind of talk about in our program about how, we could be walking down by the river, for example. We get to the end of our hike and we've got burrs all over our clothes. We didn't ask for them, we didn't want them, we didn't deserve them, but here we are at the end of the day. And it's kind of like that in our everyday life, where we can be going, somebody will say something rude, something mean, something harsh, something just absolutely undeserved. And we get to the end of the day and we didn't want them, we didn't deserve them, and we certainly didn't ask for them, but we have these burrs on our heart. And the same as we would take those burrs off our clothes, we want to take those off and say what's true. And then we could be walking down by the river and find something shiny, a marble or a coin. And we recognize that they're slippery and we have to actually hold on to them or we'll lose them. But they're way more valuable, and those things are worth holding on to. Well, sometimes somebody does something kind or generous or just plain selfless in our lives towards us. We want to hold on to those. Those are the things we want to ruminate over. Those are the things we want to remember, the marbles. And it's interesting because as kindness superheroes, we don't just have the superpower of being marble finders, but we have the power to be marble creators. And we have this practice that we write words of affirmation in the class. And so at the end of the 8 weeks, I've had 8 weeks with these amazing kids, and I get to write down some really great things that I see in them. And I go, hey, this is the gold I see in you. And they have this moment where they can actually be marked. And these kids are in grade 6. It's been 3 years since I've seen them, still have their marbles.
Wow.
Still have those paper, and they will mention it when they see me. Miss Nikki, I still have the 1 or the 2 different marbles that you gave me. And there's something about a powerful and honest and genuine word of encouragement that can actually change a life.
Definitely. I think if you think about kindness overall, like you can have a cold and you can feel awful, but if you're kind to someone, then like that kind of slips away for even just like a moment, and if someone's kind back to you, then it can keep going. So it makes it so easy for things to be looking brighter and looking up when you're just kind. Like it's such a simple thing to do.
Absolutely, and that is the beauty, because kindness isn't just something that I can do for you, but it's something I can do for me. And just the courage to actually be kind to myself, to give myself the margin to let myself get the rest I need, to say no to that one thing, to give myself space to do life well, and kindness all around, whether it's towards myself or towards others, makes such a difference in the world. And I think if we actually understood the power that we have to address the challenges we face in the world and in our life with kindness, I think we'd actually be surprised at the resulting circumstances that would come if we used kindness as a tool.
Well, you think about how people respond just in their day-to-day, is what that would mean if you always responded with something kind, instead of getting frustrated in a slow line at the grocery store or getting frustrated at a traffic stop. It's if you respond with kindness and say, oh, you know what, this person's they're probably having a bad day. What could I do to make their day better? And in that moment in the grocery line, it's definitely not get frustrated and like speak up about it, right? It's be understanding and patient. And
absolutely. And we can do that too. I mean, I don't know how many times you're standing in that grocery line, especially in a busy time of year or whatever, and you see somebody giving a hard time to that teller. Well, just because the person in front of you wasn't kind to the teller doesn't mean you couldn't actually go overboard and just say, wait a minute, I saw what happened there. You didn't deserve that. And just so you know, you're appreciated in your job. And all of a sudden, you in that one span of a moment can undo what was done in the moment prior, and actually leave that person at least at net zero when you leave. And that sometimes is really powerful too.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Nikki. We really appreciate you taking the time, and we'll be right back after this break.
This program is brought to you by Ignite TV. Now you're in command. Visit Rogers.com for more details.
Call the Rogers TV viewer response line, email us, or connect with us on social media.
Could you use some extra cash? Tune in to McLaren Arts Center TV Bingo on Rogers TV for your chance to win. We have $2,500 in prizes up for grabs every Tuesday night. 5 ways to play, 20 chances each night, but only one way to win. Tune in to McLaren Arts Center TV Bingo, Tuesdays at 8 p.m. only on Rogers TV.
I came here to find safety.
Please, sir, someone's after me.
But one is never safe from the past. I have a plan.
Another top secret rescue mission.
We all have a story just waiting to be claimed. We are the ones to write the future.
Hello, I'm Liz Dowdswell, Lieutenant Governor of Ontario. In 2008, carbon monoxide, a deadly invisible gas, killed an entire family in our province. That tragedy led to a new law requiring homes with potential CO sources to have alarms. John Gignac's family members passed away that day, and he shares his story to save others.
Please make sure you have working CO alarms in your home. Protect your family today.